Something happened to you. Maybe 6 months ago. Maybe last night. A message that ended something. A door that closed without announcement. A person who walked out. A business that stopped breathing. A phone call that divided your life into a before and an after. And on the outside, you handled it. You said the right things. You told everyone you were fine. But here is what nobody saw. 3 weeks later, you are sitting in your car in a parking lot with the engine off, and you are not going anywhere. You open your laptop at 9 in the morning. You stare at the same screen until 2 in the afternoon, and you have done nothing. You are not sad exactly. You are not crying. Something inside you just switched off, and you cannot find the switch to turn it back on. Then you look around at other people. You watch someone take a hit that looks worse than yours and stand back up inside a week. And a very quiet, very ugly question starts forming. What is wrong with my wiring? Why can they carry this and I cannot? Most people will hand you an answer that sounds like comfort but lands like an accusation. Stay positive, be strong, time heals everything. Other people have it worse. And every one of those sentences makes you feel more broken than you already did, because none of them tell you what to actually do. The real answer is something almost nobody has ever told you exists. If you have ever sat in that parking lot not knowing why you could not move, subscribe and leave a like. And at the end, drop a comment with which of the 3 traps we cover has been running your life the longest. Read what other people write. You are going to find you are far from the only one who picks yours. In 1967, 2 psychologists named Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer ran an experiment that became one of the most referenced in the history of the field. Animals were exposed to a stressor they could not escape. Later, when escape became easy and obvious, they did not even try. They lay down and took it. Seligman and Meyer called it learned helplessness, and the conclusion spread through psychology and popular culture for 50 years. If life beats you down enough times, you learn that nothing you do matters, and that learning makes you passive. Then, in 2016, the same 2 researchers published a paper revisiting that conclusion, and they said something scientists almost never say. We got it backwards. 50 years of neuroscience had shown them that giving up was never learned in the first place. Shutting down is the factory setting. When a mammal absorbs prolonged pain, it cannot escape. A small structure deep in the brainstem called the dorsal rough nucleus floods the system with serotonin, and that flood actively suppresses the urge to act. It is automatic, it is built in. It is standard equipment in every human being on this planet, including the ones you most admire for their strength. Here is the part that changes how you see everything that followed the worst moments of your life. The thing that has to be learned is not helplessness. The thing that has to be learned is control. There is a region behind your forehead, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, whose job is to detect whether you have any real influence over what is happening to you. When that region detects control, it reaches down and switches the shutdown off. Your brain does not come pre-installed with strength. It comes pre-installed with collapse. Strength is the software you have to install yourself, on purpose, through specific kinds of experience. And if you have never been shown how to install it, you have been sitting in the dark waiting for a light that was never going to come back on by itself. Share this with someone who has been quiet lately. The person who says they are fine and clearly is not. They probably do not need advice. They need to hear that what they experienced was automatic and that the reset is something that can be learned. So why does that control detector fail to develop in so many people? This is where it stops being about your brain and starts being about the environment your brain grew up inside. The control detector learns the same way a muscle learns. It needs repetitions. It needs repeated experiences of you pushing against something difficult and watching the difficulty move as a result. And modern life has quietly removed almost every opportunity for that while multiplying the opposite. Look at what fills your average day. Economic forces you have no hand in. Comment sections designed to keep you agitated. Political news engineered to sustain outrage. A war on another continent. An algorithm deciding whether 3,000 strangers ever see your work. Every one of these is a genuine stressor. And you have exactly zero influence over any of them. Your brain absorbs them for hours each day. That is hours each day of registering pain it cannot act on, which is the precise laboratory condition that produces shutdown. And at the same time, look at what has been removed. You do not cook, food arrives. You do not wait, it streams instantly. You do not sit with boredom, you scroll through it. You do not push through the difficult conversation, you leave it on read. Anything uncomfortable that you could have actually controlled and moved has been replaced by a button that makes it disappear. So your day is built of stress you cannot influence and comfort that requires no effort. There is no middle ground. There is nothing left in your week where you push against something real and watch it move. Your control detector has no training data. It has never accumulated enough evidence that your actions change outcomes, so it has never learned to switch off the shutdown. You are not weak. You were never given the repetitions. That is a completely different problem. And unlike weakness, it is fixable. But before we get to how you fix it, you need to see the 3 patterns that actively keep you stuck. Because most people are not just missing the training. They are doing things every day that deepen the problem. The first trap is what has been called protecting your peace. And it hides inside language that sounds like self-awareness. You are setting a boundary. You are honoring where you are right now. You are protecting your energy. And sometimes, genuinely, you are. But be honest with yourself for 10 seconds when you cancel the meeting because you are not in the right headspace. When you avoid the conversation with someone important for the 4th year running because you are not ready yet. When you quit the difficult thing in week 2 because it was affecting your mental health. Every one of those was a controllable difficulty. Every one of them was a repetition your control detector needed. And every time you delete a controllable difficulty from your life, you are not protecting anything. You are running a training session that teaches your brain one lesson. Hard things are things I move away from, not things I move. Avoidance feels like relief in the moment, and relief feels like proof you made the right call. So the trap rewards you every single time you fall into it. Meanwhile, the stress you cannot influence, the noise and the news and the algorithm, you leave completely switched on. You are shielding yourself from the only stress that could make you more capable, and drowning in the only stress that guarantees you stay less capable, and your world quietly shrinks every year without you noticing because you mistake the shrinking for peace. The second trap is what could be called the fairness contract. Something genuinely unfair happens to you. You get passed over. You are betrayed by someone you were loyal to. And instead of moving, your mind opens a case file. You replay it. You build the argument. You rehearse what you should have said. You explain it to people who agree you were right, and you were right. That is what makes this trap so difficult to escape. It genuinely was unfair. But look at what you are actually doing with your energy. You are not trying to change the situation. You are trying to win a verdict from reality. You want the record to be corrected before you agree to move forward, and reality does not show up to court. Psychologically, the fairness contract puts the power to release you into someone else's hands, because you have decided you cannot move until they acknowledge what they did. The person who hurt you now controls the timeline of your recovery. Being right has become more important than being free, and those two things are almost never the same thing. The third trap is fusing the event to who you are. There is a difference between the business failed and I am a failure. There is a difference between she left and I am unlovable. There is a difference between I got rejected and I am the kind of person who gets rejected. The event is identical in both versions, but in the first, something happened to you. In the second, something was revealed about you. When you fuse the hit to your identity, recovery becomes mechanically impossible. Fixing a difficult month is a project you can start tomorrow. Fixing who you fundamentally are is not a project at all. It is a life sentence, and your brain quite reasonably does not attempt tasks it has classified as impossible, so it shuts down. And every subsequent setback becomes an existential event. A missed deadline becomes proof about your future. One difficult relationship becomes evidence about your entire capacity for connection. You start carrying every hit you have ever taken into every new room, and you wonder why you feel so heavy. Here is what all 3 traps cost together. You spent years protecting yourself. You avoided the hard conversation. You left the difficult thing undone. You stayed in the smaller, safer version of the day. And the entire purpose of that protection was to make sure you never felt the pain of failing at something that mattered. But your capacity to handle pain is not a fixed tank you were issued at birth. It is built by use, the same way everything else is built. The exact thing you did to feel safe is the thing that removed your capacity to actually be safe. You are more afraid now than you were 5 years ago. Not because life got harder, because you got smaller. The protection cost you the thing the protection was supposed to preserve. So how do you actually get out? Start with what the goal is not. The goal is not to stop feeling the hit. You cannot decide not to trip the breaker any more than you can decide not to bleed when you are cut. That mechanism is older than your personality, and it does not take requests. Anyone selling you a mind that feels nothing is selling a fantasy, and chasing it will add shame on top of the pain already there. The goal is much smaller and far more achievable. Shorten the distance between the hit and your first controlled action. That is the entire skill, not the absence of falling. The speed of the reset. Here are 4 specific ways to build it. The first is to find the smallest controllable lever available right now. When your brain is scanning for evidence of control, it does not care about the size of what you control. It only cares that something responded to you. So after a hit, stop asking why this happened. That question has no lever attached to it. Ask instead, what is the smallest thing in front of me right now that will move if I push it? Make the bed, send one email, not 20. Wash the dishes. Walk to the end of the street and come back. It will feel absurdly small compared to the size of the problem. Do it anyway. You are not solving your life. You are feeding your prefrontal cortex a single piece of evidence that your actions still change outcomes, and that evidence is what flips the panel back on. The second is to choose your stress instead of only receiving it. In the early 1980s, Illinois Bell went through one of the largest corporate upheavals in American history. A team of researchers led by Salvatore Maddi had been studying hundreds of their managers for years before it happened, and continued following them afterward. 2/3 fell apart. But 1/3, exposed to exactly the same disruption, came through stronger than they went in. One of the consistent differences Maddi found was that the resilient group treated difficulty as something to engage with rather than something to survive. You do not build that orientation by reading about it. You build it by deliberately inserting controllable hardship back into a life that has deleted it. Train when it is cold. Have the conversation this week instead of next year. Finish the course. Sit with boredom for 20 minutes without your phone. None of these matter much individually. Together, they are the repetitions your control detector never got. You are manufacturing the training data your brain was never given. The third is to stay flexible rather than rigid. George Bonanno at Columbia spent decades tracking what actually happens to people after the worst events of their lives. Across more than 50 studies covering loss, injury, disaster, and combat, roughly 65% of people showed few or no lasting symptoms. Resilience is not rare, it is the majority outcome. But when Bonanno examined what those people had in common, it was not emotional armor, it was flexibility. They could feel something fully when feeling it was useful, and set it down when setting it down was more useful. They could ask for support on Tuesday and handle something alone on Thursday. They matched their response to the situation instead of having one fixed setting for all conditions. The rigid mind is not the strongest one. A steel rod does not bend right up until the moment it snaps completely. Anyone who has decided they will never cry, never ask, never need anyone, has not built strength. They have built a fuse. And fuses only work once. The fourth is to build something the hit cannot reach. The resilient managers at Illinois Bell had something they were invested in that the corporate upheaval could not touch. Work outside the company. A standard for how they behaved regardless of circumstances. A role in something that existed independently of the job. This matters because it changes the structural size of any hit. If your entire identity is your career, losing the career collapses the whole structure. If your career is one of several things you are genuinely invested in, losing it takes out one wall in a building that is still standing. The question to ask now is not what do I want? It is what do I have that stays standing when the thing I care about most is taken? Build that now, before anything is on fire. Nobody builds it during the emergency. Before you take this and go, you need to know what it actually costs, because nobody warns you about this part. When you genuinely become harder to destabilize, some people will not experience it as admirable. They will experience it as distance. The person who used to call you at midnight will find you calm when they expect it activated, and calm is not what they came for. The people who could always move you by a certain tone of voice or a particular kind of silence will find that the handle they relied on is no longer attached to anything. People rarely say thank you when they lose leverage over you. They say you have changed. They say you have gotten hard. They say you do not care anymore. There is a second cost that is quieter and lands differently. When you stop visibly falling apart, people stop checking on you. You become the one nobody worries about, the one who is always fine. You will carry real things alone not because nobody cares about you, but because you got so efficient at the reset that nobody noticed the breaker ever tripped. That is the actual price of a mind like this. Not enemies, distance. But here is what is on the other side of that price. Your capacity to be hurt does not disappear. You will still get blindsided. You will still have the parking lot night. You will still take hits that put you on the floor. What changes is the length of the stay. What used to take 9 months takes 4 weeks. What used to take a month takes a day. And eventually something shifts in how you walk into rooms. Because somewhere below your conscious thinking, your brain has accumulated enough evidence to believe one sentence. Whatever this is, I have come back from worse. And I know where the switch is. That is the whole thing. Not a mind that cannot be knocked down. A mind that has stopped being afraid of the floor because it has been there enough times to know the way back up. Emmy Werner spent 40 years following an entire birth cohort of children born into serious disadvantage. Everything predicted they would struggle. A third of them became competent, functioning, confident adults anyway. When Werner looked for what made the difference, she did not find extraordinary talent. She found one adult who paid attention, something they were responsible for, and a place where their effort visibly changed something. Viktor Frankl, writing after surviving circumstances that stripped nearly everything away, argued that the last available freedom is always the freedom to choose your response to what happens to you. He was not describing a superpower. He was describing the final piece of control that remains when everything else has been taken, and he insisted it was always still there. That is what all of this comes down to. Not being unbreakable, just refusing to sit in the dark waiting for someone else to come and flip the switch, when the switch has been under your hand the entire time. Drop a comment with which of the 3 traps has been running your life the longest: protecting your peace, the fairness contract, or fusing the hit to who you are. Be specific, because the more specific you are, the more the thread becomes useful to the people reading it. Subscribe to this channel if this is the kind of conversation you want to keep having. Share this with someone who has been quiet lately and says they are fine. Because what they need is not advice. They need to hear that what they experienced was automatic and that the reset is something that can actually be built.